Imagine staring at a button on your screen that you know could, like, fundamentally change your life.
Right. The book appointment button.
Exactly. Clicking it is the right move.
Yeah.
But instead of just clicking the thing, you suddenly decide you urgently need to go reorganize your spice rack.
Or fold laundry you didn't even know you had.
Yeah. Because, while the human brain has this astonishing capacity to survive profound known trauma, it just absolutely panics at the thought of unknown logistics.
It really does. It hates the void.
It's Saturday, April 4th, 2026, and welcome to today's deep dive. Our entire mission today is to dismantle that paralyzing fear of the unknown that keeps so many of you from actually starting therapy.
Because it is arguably, the most profound barrier in mental health care. Making the decision to seek help takes immense courage, but
But it's usually not the deep emotional work that actually stops people, is it?
no, not usually. It's rarely the fear of the deep emotional work that stops people from booking. It is the logistical void. Like I said, the brain hates a void. It's the what happens when the screen turns on, or am I going to be interrogated?
What do I even say?
Exactly. What do we even say?
And so, to shine a light into that void, we're pulling from a really specific, just illuminating framework provided by coping and healing counseling, also known as mental space therapy.
Yeah, they've laid out a really fantastic roadmap.
They have an exact roadmap of what happens before, during, and after a first therapy session. And, if you're listening to us right now and you've been putting this off because your brain is just spinning with questions about whether you're doing it wrong.
Which is such a common fear.
Right. I just want to assure you that paralysis is a completely standard operating procedure for the human mind.
It is entirely biological. Anticipatory anxiety thrives whenever an environment is unpredictable. Your amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats, it literally interprets unknown as unsafe.
Okay, that makes me think of the dread of trying a new, really complex fitness class.
Oh, that's a great example.
You know the kind I mean, where there are all these bizarre machines with pulleys and straps, and you've never been.
And everyone else seems to know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly. You don't know the terminology, you don't know where to stand, and you are just dreading showing up because you think you're going to look foolish doing the moves wrong in front of this expert.
Right. You feel like you're going to be evaluated.
Yeah. But imagine discovering beforehand that the instructor isn't there to critique your form at all. They're literally just there to guide you completely at your own pace, and their baseline expectation is that you have absolutely no idea what you're doing.
That is a highly accurate parallel. Because what's fascinating about having a literal step-by-step preview of an intimidating event is how it fundamentally alters your brain chemistry.
Really, just knowing the steps changes the chemistry.
Absolutely. When you map out the environment, you neutralize that anticipatory anxiety. The amygdala stands down. It just stops firing off warning signals because the terrain is finally mapped.
Wow.
So by walking through this mental space therapy framework today, the objective is to make this entire experience feel like familiar territory for you before you ever even click that button to book an appointment.
So let's actually map that terrain then, because I want to start with the friction points that happen before you even see a face on a screen. We always romanticize therapy as this purely intellectual exercise, right?
Right, like it's just a meeting of minds.
Yeah, but getting there requires physical, practical steps. From appointment booked to sitting in front of a camera, the first hurdle is always the intake paperwork.
Which thankfully is deliberately designed to be really mundane.
It's just forms.
Exactly. It mirrors the exact process you go through when you see a new primary care doctor. It asks for basic background information, brief sentence on what brings you in, and your insurance details. Predictability is the goal here.
Well, let's talk about that insurance detail for a second, because financial ambiguity is a massive, unspoken roadblock.
Oh, massive. It's a huge barrier.
A lot of people are sitting there thinking, I literally can't afford to find out how much this costs. So they just don't do it.
And that's entirely understandable.
But the framework we're looking at specifically emphasizes verifying insurance before that very first appointment, so you know your exact copay.
Yeah.
There's zero surprise billing.
Which is such a relief.
And they highlight a truly crucial detail for those listening in Georgia, which is that for Georgia Medicaid plans, so like CareSource, Amerigroup, and Peach State, it is typically $0 out of pocket.
And I have to say, the clinical significance of removing that financial ambiguity really cannot be overstated here.
Why is that? Obviously it saves money, but clinically.
Well, if we look at the cognitive mechanics of a therapy session, financial stress is essentially a competing cognitive load.
Okay, a competing cognitive load.
Right. So, if you are sitting in a session and you're trying to unpack this really complex relationship dynamic, but your prefrontal cortex is quietly running terrifying calculations about how much this 50-minute hour is going to drain from your bank account.
You're not really there.
Exactly. You are not actually present. You cannot engage in deep introspection when you are in a state of financial survival mode.
That makes so much sense.
Resolving that up front, and especially offering $0 out-of-pocket avenues, it strips away that psychological barrier, allowing your brain to actually do the work.
So you're essentially shutting down the background apps, draining your battery so the main program can run.
I love that analogy, yes.
Okay, so alongside the financial friction is the environmental friction. The tech setup itself is pretty straightforward, right? It's a secure, IPA-compliant video link.
Right. Think of it like a Zoom call, but heavily encrypted, private, and there is absolutely no surprise recording happening.
Okay, good to know. But I want to push back on our cultural assumptions about the environment itself, because the framework states you just need an internet connection and a private space, like a bedroom, a closet, or even sitting in a parked car.
Yes, very common.
And it explicitly mentions that therapists genuinely do not care if you show up in your pajamas. I have to admit, that feels wrong to me.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm supposed to unpack my life's trauma in sweatpants next to my winter coats in the closet.
It challenges everything we've been taught about professional interactions.
It really does. Because society trains us that appointments require presentation. You know, you dress to impress. You sit on a pristine leather couch, you wear a blazer, and you present yourself as a fully functioning adult who just needs a tiny bit of fine-tuning.
Right. The illusion of having it all together.
Being in pajamas in a closet completely upends that whole power dynamic.
And that upending of the power dynamic is precisely why the pajama rule, as we'll call it, is clinically brilliant.
Yeah.
Think about the physiological energy required to perform the role of a functional adult. Commuting across town, sitting in a stark waiting room, wearing restrictive professional clothing. These are all forms of armor.
Oh, wow. Armor.
Yes, you are building up a protective shell just to get through the door.
Because you're bracing for an evaluation.
Exactly. But therapy is the active dismantling of that armor. If a therapist requires you to put on your armor just to speak with them, well, then they have to spend half the session helping you take it back off again.
That is such a good point.
By allowing you to stay in your safest physical environment, wearing clothes that actually regulate your nervous system, the therapist is implicitly communicating. Come exactly as you are. I need to see the real, unpolished version of you, not the version that attends board meetings.
The idea of not having to waste energy putting on the armor in the first place is just incredibly validating. Okay, so the physical armor is off, you're in your car, you're comfortable, then the screen turns on. Yeah, and those first 10 minutes are what terrify people. If I'm physically unprotected in my sweatpants, I need psychological walls. I'm just imagining this terrifying silence where the therapist just stares at me waiting for me to confess my sins.
The dreaded awkward silence.
Exactly. How does a therapist actually disarm that?
Well, they disarm it by taking the wheel immediately. The therapist will always take the lead in those opening minutes.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right. They introduce themselves, they share their clinical background, and they outline how they typically approach sessions. But the most vital structural element they introduce right out of the gate is the explicit boundary of confidentiality.
They lay out the rules.
Yes. Everything is strictly private, barring the standard legal exceptions, like an imminent danger to yourself or others, or specific reporting requirements.
But why spend the first 5 minutes of a highly anticipated session reading, like, the terms and conditions?
Because in a therapeutic setting, safety isn't just a vague feeling you hope to achieve. It is a rigid boundary you must construct. By clearly defining the absolute limits of the container, the therapist is building a secure perimeter.
A container.
Yeah. If you are going to explore the darkest corners of your mind, you need to know exactly where the walls are so you can lean your full weight against them without the fear of falling through into, public exposure.
That makes perfect sense. You're building the container before you try to put anything heavy inside it.
Precisely.
But inevitably, once that container is built, they do have to ask the question, what brought you in today?
They do.
And I have to ask this on behalf of everyone listening who overthinks.
Go for it.
What if I don't have a neat, tightly rehearsed elevator pitch about my mental state? What if my thoughts are just a chaotic, swirling mess and I genuinely cannot articulate what is wrong with me.
It is perhaps the most universal fear of the first session, and the approach mental space therapy takes here is deeply reassuring. You are not presenting a thesis defense. You do not need an elevator pitch. Therapists are highly trained to act as interpreters for your chaos. They don't expect you to do their job for them.
So I don't have to be my own therapist before I go to therapy.
Not at all. The framework highlights that saying something as incredibly vague as, "I've just been feeling off lately," or "My anxiety seems to be getting worse," or even, "Honestly, a friend suggested I try this and I don't know why I'm here."
Wait, I can say I don't know why I'm here.
Yes, those are perfectly valid, workable starting points.
So I don't have to show up with a self-diagnosis already neatly packaged. I can just hand them, like, a tangled ball of yarn, and they help me find the end of the string.
Precisely. They know exactly how to ask the gentle, probing questions that help untangle the yarn.
Okay, so the ice is broken. The container is built.
Mm-hmm.
Now we enter the actual middle of the session. How does the work happen without it feeling like an interrogation under a spotlight?
Well, the defining characteristic of that middle phase is client autonomy. It is a conversation where you control the throttle.
Okay, I control the throttle.
Yes. The therapist will guide the inquiry, but you have the absolute right to answer as deeply or as superficially as you want. If a topic feels too hot to touch, you can simply say, "I don't want to go there today."
And what if I do go there? Because a massive fear people have is that their thoughts are uniquely terrible.
Oh, the "I'm fundamentally broken" fear.
Yeah, that if they say what they are actually feeling, the therapist is going to gasp, clutch their pearls, and immediately send them to a psych ward.
Right.
But the reality outlined here is that there are no wrong answers, and you literally cannot shock a good therapist.
You cannot. You really cannot. They are clinically trained to hold space for the most complex, paradoxical, and darkest human emotions.
They've heard it all.
Anger, deep shame, profound grief, total numbness, intrusive thoughts. It is their everyday professional landscape.
I want to dig into the physical reactions that happen in this middle phase too, because this is where the biology gets really interesting.
Crying.
Yes, crying. The framework notes that crying is incredibly common and wholly welcomed. And I think we need to reframe this, because most of us operate under the assumption that if we start crying in front of a stranger, it means we are having a breakdown,
We view it as a total failure of emotional regulation.
a structural collapse.
Exactly.
But if we look at the mechanics of it, crying in a therapy session isn't a breakdown at all. It is a biological pressure valve.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, imagine you've been furiously holding down a valve on a highly pressurized system for months or maybe years because you had to keep functioning at work and at home.
Holding it all together.
Right. And when you finally sit in an environment that your brain recognizes as completely safe and judgment-free, your nervous system just shifts. It realizes, oh, wait, I don't have to brace for impact here. And it just opens the release valve.
That is a brilliant way to describe the shift from the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight, bracing for impact state, to the parasympathetic state, which is what actually allows for processing and release.
So the crying is actually a good sign.
The tears are literally a physiological byproduct of your body recognizing safety. The therapist will not panic if you cry. They recognize it as progress.
Okay, but this raises a crucial counterpoint, I think.
What's that?
What happens if the exact opposite occurs? What if you log on, you talk for 45 minutes, and you feel absolutely nothing?
Ah, yes. The framework acknowledges that, actually. It says the session might feel anticlimactic or, quote, nothing special.
Which feels weird, right? You build up all this anticipation, you finally click the button, and then it's just a chat.
It feels weird because of our cultural conditioning. We are so saturated with media portrayals of therapy that promise these cinematic, explosive breakthroughs on day one.
Like Good Will Hunting or something.
Exactly. We expect the tearful monologue, the sudden flashback, the immediate epiphany that just cures us.
Right.
Consequently, when a client logs off and thinks, well, we just talked about how annoyed I am with my coworker, they panic. They assume they are failing at therapy or the therapist is incompetent.
They didn't get their Hollywood moment, so they think the whole process is broken.
Exactly. But a lack of immediate fireworks is not only normal, it is actually a sign of a healthy, methodical process.
How so?
Because you are building a deeply trusting human relationship with a stranger. You are laying a foundation brick by brick. I mean, you wouldn't expect a contractor to build an entire house in 45 minutes, right?
Yeah, of course not.
And you shouldn't expect to restructure your psyche in that time either.
That makes a lot of sense. So whether you were weeping or just having a low-key chat about your week, eventually you hit the final 10 minutes. The session has to end.
It does.
How does a therapist safely pack all of this back up so you can go back to your job or your family?
Well, the winding down phase is meticulously managed. A skilled practitioner does not just look at the clock, interrupt you mid-sentence, and say, well, time's up, see you next week.
Which would be awful.
It would be terrible. No, they will begin to summarize the dialogue, reflecting the core themes back to you. This ensures you feel accurately heard and helps neatly compartmentalize the discussion.
They put the lid back on the container.
Exactly. And they will also explicitly check in on your emotional state before you disconnect.
And they might leave you with something to think about, right? The coping and healing framework notes, they might suggest 1 or 2 gentle observations to notice before the next session.
Yes, just gentle observation.
And I want to be very clear with everyone listening about how this is framed. This is not stressful homework.
No, not at all.
It is not a worksheet you have to complete to get a good grade. It's more along the lines of, hey, this week, just notice what happens to your breathing when your boss emails you.
It is the cultivation of gentle curiosity, not the addition of a chore to your to-do list. From there, you simply handle the logistics of scheduling the next session, and weekly is standard to build momentum. And then the screen goes dark.
And that brings us to the aftermath. Once the screen is dark, you are alone in your room again.
Back to reality.
Yeah, and the framework is refreshingly honest about the post-session emotional variance. It says you might feel lighter, you might feel energized, but you might also feel completely drained.
The very common.
Some feel a wave of relief, while others feel incredibly stirred up because real difficult things have been brought to the surface.
And this is where they offer a crucial mandate.
Yeah.
You must give yourself grace for doing something brave. The
Right.
emotional hangover is a real thing.
Okay, I have to push back on this stirred up feeling though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because frankly, if I go to a doctor with a broken arm, they put a cast on it, and the sharp pain immediately decreases. I am paying for relief. Why would I voluntarily subject myself to an experience and pay money for it? That might leave me feeling completely drained or actually worse than when I logged on.
It is a totally logical objection, and it gets to the absolute core of how emotional healing differs from physical healing.
Well, so?
When you have a broken arm, the pain is acute and unavoidable. But emotional pain operates differently. We manage emotional pain through suppression. You push it down, you distract yourself, you work longer hours, you numb it. It takes a massive amount of metabolic energy to suppress those feelings.
So we're basically just outrunning it.
We are outrunning it. When you enter therapy, you stop running. You actively bring the festering wound into the light to clean it out. And cleaning a wound stings.
It really does.
It hurts more in the moment than simply ignoring it. But cleaning it is the only physiological way to prevent a chronic systemic infection.
Wow.
The feeling worse part, that drained, stirred up aftermath, is just a temporary exposure to the reality of your emotions. It is the sting of the antiseptic. But the resilience and clarity you build from actually processing it, that is permanent.
Wow. Okay, so you're feeling the pain of the cure, not the pain of the injury.
Yeah.
That fundamentally changes how you view a difficult session.
It recontextualizes the whole experience.
It really does. Now, even armed with all of this, understanding the $0 copay options, the pajama rule, the lack of an elevator pitch, and the wound cleaning process, there is still one final, lingering fear that stops people. The fear of a bad match. What if I do all of this? I do everything right, and I just don't click with the person on the screen.
Well, it is a highly probable scenario because at its core, therapy is just a specialized human relationship, and we do not click with every human we meet.
That's very true.
The research consistently shows that the therapeutic alliance, which is the actual relational fit between you and the therapist, is the single most important predictor of success.
Really. More than their degree.
Far outweighing the specific clinical methodologies or the letters after the therapist's name.
See, I used to think about this like trying on shoes, but that doesn't quite capture the nuance. It's more like hiring a translator.
Oh, a translator. I like that.
Yeah, because you might find a translator who is technically brilliant, highly credentialed, and speaks 6 languages. But if they don't intuitively grasp your specific emotional dialect, you're going to spend the entire session exhausted, just trying to explain your context to them.
Having to constantly translate yourself.
Yeah. Right. You need someone who naturally speaks your language. And if they don't, it's not a failure on your part, and it's not necessarily a failure on theirs.
That is the perfect way to frame it, a mismatch of emotional dialects. And to navigate this, the industry standard is the 2 to 3 session rule.
Okay, what's that?
You give a new therapist a few sessions to get past the initial awkwardness and establish a baseline. But if, by session 3, you are still exhausted from constantly translating yourself, you have the absolute right to ask to switch.
And what's really empowering about the mental space therapy framework is that they don't just leave you to wander the wilderness if that first match isn't right.
No, they don't.
Their team is specifically structured to help match you with someone who fits your dialect. If taking that logistical friction away sounds like the right move for you, that's literally what they are built for.
And they make it so accessible.
They really do. They provide telehealth across the entire state of Georgia. You can look at their setup at treatchytherapy.com to see how they handle that low-pressure onboarding we've been talking about, or you can just email them at support@cheaptherapy.com, or frankly, just pick up the phone and call them at 404-832-0102.
It places the patient firmly in the driver's seat of their own healthcare. The system flexes to support you, not the other way around.
We have mapped out a lot of territory today. We started with the paralyzing dread of that unknown fitness class.
We covered a lot of ground.
We unpacked the surprising relief of the logistics, the fact that financial anxiety can literally block introspection, and how staying in your sweatpants dismantles the exhausting armor of professionalism.
The pajama rule is my favorite takeaway.
Same. We explored the rigid safety of those first 10 minutes, the biological necessity of the pressure valve releasing during the session, and the temporary sting of cleaning out an emotional wound in the aftermath. Thank you so much for exploring this roadmap with us. I genuinely hope it has transformed the terrifying unknown into a familiar, navigable landscape for you.
Before we sign off, I just want to leave you with one final thought, building on what we discussed regarding the suppression of emotional pain.
Oh, please do.
I want you to visualize the immense, exhausting amount of mental energy you spend every single day just subconsciously avoiding your hard stuff. The daily mental gymnastics required to keep those boxes tightly taped shut.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. What if leaning into the temporary 45-minute discomfort of a first therapy session is actually the secret to reclaiming all of that lost energy for the rest of your life?
Reclaiming your energy. That is such a powerful concept to sit with. Whenever you are ready to take that brave first step and walk into the room, remember, the instructor's already there, just waiting to guide you. Take care, everyone.